treat AI as infrastructure, not just as some kind of an innovation theatre.
Innovation theatre, that's a wonderful phrase. Welcome back to Control Alt Lead, the podcast from computing where we talk to IT leaders at the sharp edge of technology and leadership. I'm Penny Horwood, and with me today is a guest who, in addition to his role as IT infrastructure lead at Carlsberg Britvic, is the founder of the AI Security, Ethics and Governance UK community, a rapidly growing national forum dedicated to strengthening the safety, resilience and accountability of AI adoption. Ajay Pancholi, welcome to Control Alt Lead.
Good morning, Penny. How are you today?
I am very well. How are you?
Yeah, doing well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast. It's a privilege to be here.
Most welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. So, AJ, you have spent 20 plus years building secure enterprise infrastructure, and now you founded the AI Security, Ethics and Governance UK community on LinkedIn. What made you want to step into this AI governance conversation?
I guess really for me personally, I saw gaps in the way the industry as a whole is moving forward. I see things from that infrastructure lens, as you mentioned, and I see security issues, the same sort of reliability and accountability challenges that we face today, as well as some of the expectations that are likely to fall within my respective technical expertise and areas in the future as the AI agency and system implementations start becoming more inherent in organizations. I could see that crossover, that accountability falling to what I fondly call the AI guardians, which is my side of the fence, but I'll talk more about that in a bit.
So, do you think that the mainstream AI conversation is focused in the right place at the moment?
Really good question, actually, Penny. So, no, I don't. I think there is too much focus at the moment on the key core vendors that supply the models themselves, not enough on systems, the pipelines for the systems and the dependencies that ultimately form the backbone and the underlying environment in which AI will run. So I do think that that's one of the large reasons I want to be championing our side of the fence, really, the infrastructure side, not the developer and not the data and those sort of areas, really. I believe that enterprises are having both a love-hate relationship with AI at the moment.
I think that's a fair description.
Absolutely. But I think from my personal perspective, I think it's largely around sometimes poor integration, weak controls, opaque vendor stacks, and a few other real life risks that can be associated with it. I think that a lot of it is down to the left hand not talking to the right hand within organizations, particularly the larger the organizations get, where you've got siloed application development teams that don't necessarily work hand in glove with infrastructure, security, some of the other more governing areas of IT. I think we need to treat AI as critical infrastructure, not so much as a toy demo either. So there's a couple of different areas that I think there are places where AI really isn't focused correctly.
Okay. So what you've alluded to there, and you also alluded to this in your submission for the Computing AI Leadership Index, the AI should be viewed as a systems challenge
Yes.
rather than a models challenge. So what does that mean in practical terms? And you alluded then to risk as well. So what risks do these opaque vendor ecosystems and the closed model pipelines create for enterprises?
Well, I think in order to answer your question there, Penny, we have to understand what I define as a systems challenge here. And I think models are maybe 10% of the risk attack surface when it comes to AI. The other 90% is actually the stuff we should already be used to as professionals working in infrastructure, which is the infrastructure itself, the data aspects of it, identity management and the day-to-day operations. What does that mean in practical terms? Data governance is effectively data and model governance, which seems to have owned the whole AI governance rhetoric at the moment. It should be a shared responsibility and it isn't. Similarly, access control and identity could probably take on what we call prompt engineering in AI at the moment. The monitoring and observability is really around getting accuracy of benchmarks, seeing how well these things perform. And then ultimately supply chain assurance can be sort of the vendor marketing aspect of it, digging deeper into when a vendor tells you about how great and secure they are. So those are the sort of things that I'm talking about. But I guess the real risks to opaque vendor ecosystems is some of the more obvious ones, like no visibility into how things like your data is handled, stored, or used. These are things that could get businesses into real trouble without having definition around who's actually liable, who's responsible and accountable ultimately. Hidden dependencies, third party application APIs that allow interconnectivity, who make sure those components are secure, robust. There are two, by the very nature of an API, there are two sides to that coin. There needs to be governance around that aspect of it. I think one for me, from my years of experience in just IT, is things like vendor lock-in. It's great. They always give you a discount when you initially come along and prices creep up over the years. I don't know what this looks like in the AI world right now, because I think we're quite early to that. People are still choosing their vendors, trying out models and integrating it into their systems. I've not heard of anybody who's tried to move from one vendor to another yet. And I could see that being not an easy thing to do. No vendor wants you to leave them, of course. And so why should they make it easy for you to move away, particularly if you've intrinsically integrated the rest of your organization's systems into Microsoft Azure, for example, with their OpenAI API. And I think the other thing about the opaque nature of these is that it really does create a false sense of safety. Yeah, we assume everybody does what it says on the tin, and we shouldn't do that. That's catching people out. We're seeing lots of different security risks, data leaks happening, even in privatized environments as well. It is definitely foolish to suggest that it's bulletproof just because you're paying somebody else to do it.
You've been caught out there, haven't they?
Absolutely.
In terms of governance, some leaders hear the word governance and just think bureaucracy. How do you internally, politically, how do you position governance as an enabler rather than, a boring blocker?
I think the reason it is seen like that is because it's the lawyers that have got in on it and coined AI governance as something that they're ultimately owning and being responsible for. And I think that's definitely a valid lens into it, but it's not the be all or the end all. And the moment it becomes almost dictatorial as to how to operate, it gets people's back up. The way I see it is it should be positioned as guardrails. It's not red tape. That's not the point behind this. It's to accelerate delivery by removing the ambiguity that you have around what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. So really, I think it should be positioned within businesses as this is the kind of steer that we're giving you to go and then be innovative and do what you need to do. It's clarity on what's allowed and what's not allowed. I think when it's described as such, I'd like to hope that builds executive confidence, unlocking maybe more investment in it. It allows trusted experiments to then move into scalable capabilities, really. So I think that's really how it needs to be done. Positioned more as guidelines rather than you must not do this and you must do that kind of an approach.
Because we don't have any legislative guardrails being set out yet. So in the absence of those, companies are on their own, aren't they? So I think it's uncertainty that's probably a bigger barrier than having guardrails in place.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe just to build on that, the lack of framework on how to develop it from an industry standard as well. We know how to do projects. There are the likes of Prince2 and PMP and these other frameworks for service management. There's ITIL. We don't really have a universally accepted framework for deploying or making AI systems. I'm not even going to call them apps any longer. I know there are several that are under development at the moment by various organizations, including the UK government as well, looking into various ways to try and formalize some of these things. But it's very early days. People don't want to miss the boats. And I think a lot of enterprises have jumped 2 feet in, investing huge sums of money in these things without really knowing how to go about getting value back out of them.
So going back to the safe, I suppose, the safe experimentation kind of space, what does that properly like?
Well, I think application developers will probably be able to answer this maybe a little better than I will, but I certainly have a view on it. And I think it's a bit like a sort of build, test, deploy model, which if anyone's familiar with ERP systems or has worked in organizations where there's a lot of app development, you have very distinct, isolated, sandboxed environments to do this, especially when you're moving into the agentic AI space and you want to try out and see how AI behaves when you're leaving it to make its own decisions, you absolutely don't want to do that in your live environment, particularly when it has controls and risks over things that could break down whatever your organization does for a business. So I think isolation sandboxing is definitely one aspect of it. I think beyond that, pre-approved tools, models, and data sets to avoid shadow AI. Shadow AI is another big issue as well. But anybody with a corporate card can go buy a service now, even if they're not allowed to. How do you physically prevent that from happening in your organization? Well, the only people who can enable the integrity of that is ultimately your infrastructure teams. It's locking down your laptops and your PCs all the way through the data traveling down your networks, etc. So having some pre-approved methods to do that. Something that I know people sit on the fence with the EU AI Act is the clear tiers. And now I'm not suggesting I feel one way or the other about what the European Union is doing in terms of legislation there, but I did like the idea that they had risk tiers. That principle, low risk experimentation versus high risk and deployment principle can be applied into organizations. There is a large question about whose role and responsibility is it to define that and put that together. I'd suggest that's AI governance ultimately, and therefore there's probably a need for most organizations of a certain size onwards to have that as an entity that's held responsible for it. I think that sort of tiering, isolated environment idea allows us to implement a solution where you can actually break things safely, intentionally. You can test the boundaries of what AI can do, how far you can go before it falls over or has an undesired outcome.
So moving on a bit to the more cultural aspect of the AI discussion, you mentioned in your submission for the AI Leadership Index that you don't come from a traditional data science background. What impact has that had on your ability to kind of influence these AI conversations within your organization?
I bring an engineering first approach, absolutely. Systems first lens. And I think that's a bit that most people ignore because there's been so much focus on who's a good coder, who can we get to do lots of the data stuff, reporting, BI, all of those elements. It's like building the best car in the world, but nobody's looking at how good the quality of the roads are that it's going to travel down. And that's
Excellent
the gap.
analogy.
Yeah, I'm glad you like that because I was trying to think of one on the fly there, and that's really I'm the guy building the road here in this instance, but I also don't think it can be done in isolation as well. I think it helps to be somebody who has a foot in both camps, and that's really me. I'm learning lots and lots about AI models and the engineering aspects of it. I'm not a programmer or a developer. That I kind of draw the line when somebody throws a line of code at me, but it helps to know a lot about how that works in order to be able to secure it and be able to provide the right guardrails around it. It also means that I can talk to CIOs and CISOs and infrastructure teams in a language that they can understand, rather than speaking in Python, or giving people code. So that's definitely a bridging opportunity between technical, operational, and governance worlds, really.
So, speaking of that communication with CIOs and the like, have you faced any resistance in your own business?
I guess initially we did from an infrastructure perspective, particularly when it came to looking at the likes of ChatGPT or Copilot, and there's all these other various websites. I guess my initial instinct was to go speak to the relevant security and risk individuals and try to get a mechanism between ourselves to come to an agreement of locking things down. Certainly in my business, security and risk first before we did anything else. Too many horror stories about data leaks, and the last thing anybody wants to be is the next poster child for the next data breach, right?
Well, especially given Carlsberg Britvic, it's a huge brand.
Exactly. We decided that it's easier for us to lock things down first and then open them after considered thought and assessment, as opposed to let it free for all and then look to lock down later. People get upset when you give them things and then take them away. It's better to sort of drip feed it. Similar principle for my children in life, unfortunately. But, there seemed to be a more risk averse method. So we've done that, as a lot of organizations done, is allowed some of the AI software as a service tools gradually. Most enterprises, we have a team of people who are working on various aspects. They're looking to try and integrate within the business to achieve better reporting or be it better guidance and functionality or quicker reporting or whatever it is. There are streams within our organization that are looking to see how we can operationalize things. We are a manufacturer at the end of the day, so the opportunity for AI or agentic AI is huge within manufacturers in particular. I've said this for a while now. I think it'll be a crucial part of all businesses. If there is resistance today, I think it will lessen naturally anyway as people become more familiar with AI. Ultimately, we're heading in a world where everybody is an IT company that makes a product or that delivers a service. And with that in mind, I think it'll both be through satisfaction in governance, but also naturally, I think as we get more familiar and accepting of technology and the way it's going, the resistance will fade, I think.
At the moment, do you think that resistance is predominantly coming from employees rather than the executive?
I can't speak naturally on behalf of the industry, but certainly from my experience, no, actually. I think there's the mainstream media as well as a lot of the companies that provide functional AI, little tools that you can buy as software as a service on the web, etc., doing a fantastic job at trying to give away free training courses. Businesses, certainly my organization is actively encouraging people to use things like Microsoft Copilot licenses. But these are productivity gains for the individual. I think we're going to hit a point where businesses want to see return on their investments. They want to see AI achieve real things that make tangible differences in terms of what they do. And I think that's a different kettle of fish. I actually think AI for productivity, it's done to death a little bit at the moment. And yes, absolute opportunity. One only has to go on YouTube and you'll find millions of videos that'll teach you how to clean up your inbox, for example. But deploying it in a way that adds real value, I think is a very different thing. Like companies like your Teslas of the world with their robotics arms, robotic taxis, etc. Real world implementations are getting more and more exciting as they go along. But then we must be cautious as well at the same time. I think whenever any technologist is putting a proposal in front of senior leadership teams, you could use things like real life incidents, data leak, shadow AI to show the cost of also standing still and not doing anything as well. So there's a real risk from that perspective too.
That's a really good point. Yes, the cost of inaction as well as action.
Absolutely.
So moving now to the community that you've founded. So what kind of ideas and themes are emerging from the practitioners in that community?
Firstly, 2 seconds on the community. It's not been around very long, but in the last sort of 6 to 7 months or so, we've got nearly 300 or so members, largely at a decision-making level or an executive level within organizations, getting more and more views and involved. Technologists like myself constantly posting things, any data leaks, and I'm trying to make it a bit of a source of information that's focused on UK specific or things that could impact UK businesses as a place for people to go in the absence of one already existing. But I think the key things that I'm seeing at the moment is a couple of things we've already talked about. The practical frameworks still lacking. There's a lot of different people putting a lot of different proposals forward, but they're all one's personal individual opinion until ratified and unanimously agreed across the industry, and that's going to take time. So at this point in time, it is still very much experimentation mode. Businesses still leaning on the third-party vendors, hoping they know what they're doing, which I mentioned earlier, I still think is quite dangerous and risky. Not until you're fully satisfied, because the business is ultimately accountable. In most instances, usually the vendors indemnify themselves legally. The other things is around the need for AI identity and access control and mechanisms around that. So as we become agentic, they're there to mimic human behavior. How do we hold agentic AI responsible and accountable? And what would be the repercussion if it went wrong in the event of replacing a human's function today? There's no real answer for that.
Question for the ages, that one, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And again, touched on it already, the opaque nature of vendors as well is one that I think will become more of a problem as time goes on, particularly as they become more agentic and more embedded. That's the way the industry is going.
Definitely. So you sort of said you think most organisations are still in this sort of experimental phase. I know that you also think that over the next 2 years, we're going to be moving from that experimentation phase into accountable deployment. What do you think is going to force that shift? Do you think it's going to be a regulation starting to step up and dispel some of that uncertainty that we talked about earlier? Do you think it'll be breaches? Do you think it's the business case? What's going to prompt that move?
I think a combination of all of those. I think the shift is going to happen because there will be a maturing in the industry as time goes on, and people do come to a unanimous way of operating, categorizing AI. The EU Act gets a lot of flack for being quite bureaucratic from some of the opposite end of the scale from some of the vendors, particularly the US based vendors. In the UK here, I'd like to think just culturally as a country, we've kind of almost kept a foot in both camps, and we try to find something in the middle that allows businesses to be innovative enough, yet still maintain some level of control. We try not to sway too far to one direction or the other. And I think the work that the BCS is doing alongside the government's own drive to try and find their own state of play, there's been some criticism around it about the UK being behind on that, but I actually think it's a calculated, measured approach. I think there's an element of wait and see how things pan out. In my opinion, that is the risk averse way of looking at it. It's absolutely the right way. I think also businesses will rapidly learn from their own mistakes. I think we will see casualties, no doubt. There will be, in the way we get security breaches affecting large organizations today, there will be AI related incidents that will make the mainstream media and there'll be businesses scrambling to try and prevent themselves from falling foul of the same thing. I think some of it will be economically driven by competition in the sector. An example, if you've got a new startup business that wants to make drinks like my organization does today, and they start off on a fully agentic path where all of their manufacturing is already agentically driven, they're already at what is most businesses' future state. So I think there'll be a competitive reason to accelerate your development, growth, interest, investment into agentic AI, which by the nature of you making mistakes along the way or learning from other people's mistakes will force a level of governance within that as well. I think we're at the cusp of the acceleration period.
Okay.
We are literally before it's about to ramp up, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah, at the bottom of the curve. So what can CIOs be doing now to prepare for that and to prepare for greater regulation and increasing
Yep.
scrutiny?
Start building on the governance foundations, really. Talk about how you want to manage your data. Treat data governance and AI governance as two very separate things. Data governance is about good inputs. AI governance is about good outputs. They're not the same.
Interesting.
Yeah. So so your AI governance is the infrastructure arms. It's the servers, it's the network, it's the security teams, it's the monitoring, it's the measuring. There are vendors that are now really getting into that space, or you can build your environment out to fulfill that requirement. It is largely, I believe, going to fall to IT security teams to be those AI guardians I talked about. They need to be involved in the conversations from the very beginning and helping to orchestrate and shape the solution, not coming to them at the end going, "We've deployed this now, guys. Can you look after it for us?" That's probably the wrong approach. I think also look at things as systems. Touched on me having that particular view at the beginning of this conversation is don't look at AI in isolation. Look at it as a component within the system. I think that's another bit. Prepare your sandboxes. If you've got ERP systems in your enterprise today, chances are you already have a development environment, a UAT environment, and a deployment environment. Employ that same principle when it comes to AI and testing it and playing with it, breaking it, and then deploying it ultimately. And also, whilst doing that development, I think the last thing to do is make sure that it's fully auditable along the way. You'd be in good place if you're able to already have logs, monitoring, documentation, accountability, auditability, functionality available to you. There's a lot of AI, by inherently as you're building it, doesn't necessarily have that included by default. You have to add those things on. I guess my final point on it would be to treat AI as infrastructure, not just as some kind of an innovation theatre.
Innovation theatre. That's a wonderful phrase. Well, that's brilliant. That sounds like exceedingly sound advice to me. So thank you for that. That just about wraps up this episode of Control Alt Lead. A huge thank you to you, AJ. If
You're
there
very
is
welcome.
one takeaway from this conversation, it's that as AI adoption accelerates, the organizations that win won't just have the whizziest models, they'll have the most resilient foundations. Thank you
believe
for
so.
listening to Control Alt Lead. If this episode got you thinking, please do share it with someone who's building AI in your organisation. You can also check out computing.co.uk for lots of news, features, and analysis. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.